October 25th. I woke up today in the relative safety of the responders' HQ within Morgantown Airport. The old man I met yesterday was still asleep on the bunk opposite mine. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope. Despite everything, we're still alive, still fighting. But the sense of safety was fleeting. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. Claire Hudson's notes were clear. The AVR Medical Center held the equipment needed to possibly create a vaccine for the Scorched Plague. If there was any chance of stopping this nightmare, I had to go there. Gathering my gear, I made sure my new marksman rifle was loaded and ready. The exit was clear, and water was falling from the sky. Rain. I looked up. The sky was a swirling mass of gray clouds. I stood there, letting the rain wash over me, feeling the coolness on my skin. It was both refreshing and surreal. Of course, I knew of rain, but I never stopped to imagine what it would feel like. It was incredible. Until a gust of wind blew past, sending a shiver down my spine. I wrapped my wet shirt tighter around me and continued my journey. Heading south towards AVR Medical Center, I kept to the back roads and forest paths. The main roads were too dangerous, filled with both the scorched and other desperate survivors. The forest, though treacherous, offered cover and concealment. The silence of the woods was almost comforting, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant cry of some mutated creature. As the day wore on, the AVR Medical Center came into view. The building stood like a beacon of the past, a place where science and hope once thrived. Now, it looked just as abandoned and desolate as the rest of the world. But I knew that inside, there might be the key to fighting back against the plague. As I expected, the medical center was overrun with scorched. They roamed the halls and rooms, their guttural noises echoing through the empty corridors. By now, I've gotten pretty good at dealing with them. Keeping to the shadows, I took them out one by one, my marksman rifle proving to be an invaluable tool of survival. After what felt like hours of clearing room after room, I finally found Claire's lab. The site was a mix of hope and despair. The scientific equipment was covered in dust, papers were scattered everywhere. It looked abandoned. But her terminal was still operational. I took a deep breath and approached the terminal, eager to see what information she had left behind. Her notes detailed her research on the scorched beasts and the scorched, much of which I had already read at the airport. But there was more. Detailed descriptions of her attempts to create a vaccine, the challenges she faced, and her theories on how to succeed. It was clear she had been close, but the scorched invasion at the airport had cut her work short. Reading her final entries, I could feel her desperation and determination. She had known the risks, but continued working, driven by the hope of saving humanity. It was a sobering reminder of the stakes we're all facing. With the information she left behind, I now had a clearer idea of what to do next. I would need two things to make the vaccine: a new fuse for the electrical box and a sample of ghoul blood. According to Claire's notes, the ghouls seemed to be the creatures that were most resistant to the Scorched Plague. Ghouls were all over the wasteland, but the fuse would be trickier to find. I saw a train yard on my map and figured that would be as good a spot as any to start looking. After leaving Claire's lab, I decided to head towards the train yard, hoping to find the equipment she had mentioned or at least some useful supplies. Even from a distance, I could hear the clicking of metal on concrete. The place was overrun by little robots. They stood on 4 little metal legs and were painted green with a red star in the middle. Their old speakers pumped out garbled words that didn't sound like English at all. I thought they were kind of cute until one spotted me and started firing. Yet another thing trying to kill me in Appalachia. Though they weren't the easiest things to hit due to their agility, within a few shots, they were nothing more than scrap on the ground. There were a lot of them, and I started to wonder where they were coming from. I pushed the thought aside and continued my search for the fuse. As I was searching, I heard heavy footsteps outside. My heart started racing, and I pressed my ear against the wall. The footsteps were loud and deliberate, echoing through the train yard. The noise sent chills down my spine, and I knew better than to stick around to find out what was causing it. I had to find that fuse fast. After picking through every locker and storage crate, I finally found a single Type T fuse in a tool chest in an old locker room. I grabbed it and hightailed it out of the train yard, taking extra precaution not to run into whatever was stomping around outside. Next up was finding a ghoul and getting a blood sample. Easy enough, I thought. There had to be some around Charleston. As I looked around the city for my target, I couldn't help but notice the destruction. But it wasn't caused by a bomb. The building and streets seemed to be wiped away, all pushed in a similar direction, and sand and silt were deposited among the rubble. A flood, perhaps, but not a natural flood. It wasn't long before I encountered a group of ghouls in an old store. I steeled myself and took them out, my rifle echoing through the empty shop. Once they were down, I approached cautiously, my stomach churning at the thought of what I had to do next. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out a syringe and collected a blood sample from one of the ghouls. The sight and smell of the dark, viscous fluid were nauseating, but I managed to keep it together. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the city. I knew I had to get back to the AVR Medical Center before nightfall. The darkness brings out even more dangers, and I wasn't keen on finding out what else might be lurking around. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains as I reached the AVR Medical Center. A few Scorched had made their way back inside, but I cleared them out on my way back to Claire's lab. I wanted to get the vaccine before I went to bed for the night. I replaced the fuse in the electrical box, popped the blood sample into the centrifuge, and analyzed it using the terminal. I turned to see the symptomatic. It stood before me, and a sense of unease crept into my mind. What if this didn't work? What if this machine is broken and kills me when I step inside? I figured it was a risk, but one I had to take. I stepped inside, and needles pricked my skin as I received the vaccine that Claire Hudson had died for. I stepped out of the machine and heard a speaker overhead crackle to life. It was Claire.
And if you're hearing this, it means you must have completed my work and inoculated yourself. The next step is to find out if our elite anti-Scorched unit, the Fire Breathers, are still alive. You can find them at the Charleston Fire Department. The Fire Breathers need to know the vaccine is ready. If they didn't make it, then you're going to need their weapons to stay alive.
The fire breathers seemed like the best equipped against the Scorched and had better weapons to boot. Looks like Charleston Fire Department is my next stop. I'm not sure if it was the vaccine that did it or the day's events, but once the voice stopped, I was overcome with exhaustion. I decided to stay here in the lab for the night. Claire had a bed and some supplies here, and I'm sure she won't mind me using them. It had been a long, harrowing day, but I feel a sense of accomplishment. Each small victory, each step forward, brings me closer to finding a way to fight back against this nightmare. For now, I need to rest and gather my strength. October 26th. I'm still shaking from what I encountered today. I didn't know something like that thing was even possible. It was huge and it spoke. Was it still human? Okay, Ethan, settle down. Start from the beginning of the day. I had a hard time sleeping last night. Too many thoughts swirling in my head, and the constant groans of the Scorched didn't help either. So, I decided to hit the road early. I crammed some cram into my stomach, definitely not the breakfast of champions, and headed out of the AVR medical building. Before I left, I took a moment to say one more goodbye to Claire. Standing there in the lab, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I thanked her for making the vaccine, for giving us a fighting chance against the plague. I promised her that I'd make sure it gets to as many people as possible. I owe her that much. With a final nod, I turned and walked away. The Charleston Fire Department was an impressive sight, even in its current state of disrepair. The main building stood tall, a sturdy structure that had weathered the apocalypse better than most. As I approached, I noticed a few fire trucks still parked in the truck bays, their red paint chipped and faded but still recognizable. It was a poignant reminder of the world that once was, where these vehicles would have rushed to the aid of those in need. Inside, the place was relatively well maintained compared to other ruins I've seen. There were a few Protectron robots wandering around, their metallic voices occasionally breaking the silence as they patrolled the area. I was cautious at first, but they didn't see me as a threat. Upstairs, I found living quarters and a small kitchen. It was clear that the fire breathers had lived here, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Some of the beds were neatly made, and personal items were still scattered around, frozen in time. Other than the Protectrons, there was only one person living at the fire department that went by Tiffany. Like the woman I met in Flatwoods, Tiffany was working on becoming a fire breather, but was struggling with the knowledge exams. There were 2 tests to become a fire breather in the automated system they had set up, a knowledge test and a physical test. The knowledge test was a breeze, especially with the notes I found scattered around the department. They really helped me understand the basics of firefighting and survival tactics. Next up was the physical test. As I headed outside to find the starting point, my eyes caught sight of another overseer box. I was so excited to find another one. It meant I was still on the right track. I opened it and listened to a recording.
Overseer's log, Charleston Fire Department. Automation used to define life in West Virginia. Now it's the only thing left. These training programs that the responders have set up. How many survivors were running through these? It takes a certain calling to voluntarily run into the middle of a fire. Rescue people. Looks like they kept up that spirit, even as the dangers changed. They must have fought the Scorched up close more than anyone. I need to find out what they knew.
Her message was short but made perfect sense. We needed to learn more about the Scorched, and who better to teach us than the fire breathers, the people who fought them the most. Their first-hand knowledge and strategies are crucial if we're going to have any chance of surviving and combating this threat. Now, Tiffany told me that the physical test was a breeze. She said it with such confidence that I almost believed it would be easy. However, she failed to mention one minor little issue. The building where the test starts is surrounded by massive, hulking monsters. As I approached the building, I ran into a group of them and instantly regretted ever leaving the vault. These creatures were unlike anything I've ever seen. They're massive, towering over even the tallest human, with grotesquely muscular bodies covered in sickly green skin. Their eyes burn with a fierce, animalistic intelligence. They were clad in ragged bits of armor and wielded makeshift weapons, scavenged from the ruins of civilization. They move with a terrifying combination of brute strength and surprising speed. And they talk. Their voices were deep and guttural, echoing with a malevolent glee as they hunted me down through the building. Just thinking about those mutants now sends a shiver down my spine. The physical test might have been a breeze, but getting to the starting line, that was a whole different challenge. Once I cleared out those giant monstrosities and my heart settled back into my chest rather than in my throat, I pressed on and took the physical exam. The test consisted of a timed obstacle course, but the real test wasn't the course itself. It was battling the Scorched that kept swarming me every time I tried to get through it. Eventually, I managed to finish the exam, out of breath and on edge. Once I was done, I listened to the pre-recorded message from the chief of the fire breathers.
Melody Larkin, Fire Breathers Captain. Congratulations on your progress thus far. Until recently, we'd now be moving you on to our final exam. A nice, easy run through an active mind burn. But these days, we got bigger fish to fry. The Scorched creatures have been pouring through Big Bend Tunnel. Someone has to stop them, and the fire breathers are the only ones with the tools and the know-how to get it done. So, for your final exam, you'll be running a course cooked up by our very own Lieutenant Madigan to get you up to speed on dealing with these Scorched. Head on over to the Belch and Betty shaft when you're ready. Our handler bot, Bernie, will get you oriented. Come back alive and human, and you're in.
Her voice crackled through the speaker, giving me my next set of instructions. I was to head to a mine for my final test in this grueling process to become a fire breather. With my day spent running around an apocalyptic hellscape, I had hit my limit. Exhausted, I decided to head back to the fire department to get some rest. I remembered that there was a room full of bunk beds waiting for me at the station. The thought of a bed, any bed, was too tempting to pass up. When I got there, I was thrilled to find a bunk with somewhat clean sheets and a blanket. It felt like a luxury in this desolate world. I settled in, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the familiar surroundings of the firehouse. For now, I can rest, recharge, and prepare for whatever comes next at Belching Betty Mine Shaft.